Many know about slavery, but few discuss paper genocide. We did not all come from Africa, and most of us have Aboriginal roots that were stripped away due to reclassification and miseducation. As a native Black American and a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, I understand the importance of tracing your lineage. If you want to learn how to trace your genealogy and apply for tribal citizenship, go to nativeblack.ancestry.com to schedule a consultation.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British, man. Quite frankly, you was kings, Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners, raised up the children to worship their images, set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them, and this shit get way deeper than your pigment.
All right. Mic check, guys. Make sure to smash the like button on the way in. Hit the Cash App if you support the mission. Make sure to check out my website, nativeblack.ancestry.com. I built it out with tons of historical resources for you guys to take advantage of. And guys, it's going to be an interesting discussion. A very, very interesting discussion indeed. We're going to be diving into a topic that really shakes the very foundation of American history. The government's own descriptions and records that quietly admit what our ancestors have always known. The so-called Negro of America is not from Africa at all. We are indigenous people of this land. So when you start looking through old government documents, reports, treaties, letters, you'll notice they describe dark-skinned tribes like the Yamasee, the Catawba, the Creek, and the Seminole as black, copper-colored, woolly-haired Indians. They didn't call them Africans. Matter of fact, the Spaniards, who were the first Europeans over here, they called them negros de terras, which literally translates to blacks of this land. And they used that as a term to differentiate us from the African slaves they would later bring over, because they called the African slaves negros de Guinea, blacks of Africa, while we were negros de terras, blacks of this land. Also, we were called Indians not because Christopher Columbus thought that he was in India or something. It comes from the Spanish word indios. That's what the Spaniards called us, indios, people in God. Now, over time, through the magic of reclassification and paper genocide, those same people who were renamed Negro, colored, and eventually African American, but their land, their names, and their history stayed right here. Now, what the textbooks will never tell you is that most of the so-called slave rebellions and the Indian wars, they're really the same. These are the same wars fought by the same people. They compartmentalize, mainstream academics, they compartmentalize history to make you think that a slave rebellion is something totally different from an Indian war. No. If you were an indigenous person labeled free and you resisted, well, they called it an Indian war. But if you were indigenous and enslaved in place and you fought back, well, now they call it a slave rebellion. Same people, same blood, different labels, depending on what made the colonizers look better. Think about that. The Yamasee War, the Stono Rebellion, the Seminole Wars, Nat Turner's Rebellion, Fort Mims, all the way to the Civil War itself. These weren't disconnected events. These were generations of the same Black indigenous families refusing to bow down. History's been chopped into categories to confuse you, but the truth is simple. Our ancestors never stopped fighting for their land, for their freedom, and their name. So tonight, we're going to peel back those layers, show you the government documents that describe these Black indigenous nations, and reveal how academic institutions compartmentalize our history to hide that the so-called Negro was and still is the real American Indian. Let's get into it. But guys, before we get into it, I also urge you to check out nativeblack.ancestry.com, because I've just built out my first ever course, Hidden Heritage. Make sure to check it out. It officially launches in a few weeks, but in the meantime, I'm offering a early bird discount. You get 50% off if you become a founding student of mine. So definitely make sure to check out the website, nativeblack.ancestry.com, if you need help with genealogy research or would like to check out the course. But earlier today, I actually spent the time putting together this timeline to really, put things in perspective for you all. Hopefully, check it out. And give me some fists or feathers in the chat so I know that you guys can read this. If it's a little bit small, there is a way for me to make it bigger. So give me some feedback, guys. I want to make sure that you guys can follow along. Shout out to Patterns. Nice to see you in the house, Patterns. GJ, nice to see you as always. Thanks for tuning in. But guys, let's get into it. Hopefully this is not too small for you to read. Let's go. Now, our story is going to begin in 1680. 1680. What happens in 1680? Well, that's when Black Indigenous people in the Carolinas have a revolt. This is actually the first recorded revolt on the continent. 1680. The Carolina Slave Revolt. Right? And these weren't foreigners on this land. These were people born of it, the descendants of its First Nations mixed with those who had been forced into bondage. They refused to bow to the colonial yoke. Their uprising rattled the infant colony and made clear that conquest here would never be easy. Meanwhile, across the Southeast, the Wale, the Timucua, and the Appalachian nations fought off both Spanish and English invasion between 1686 and 1692. You've got the Appalachian rebellions and the Wale and Timucua resistance, right? Their villages burned, their people enslaved or sold, yet they kept striking back, planting the seeds of a centuries-long resistance that stretched across borders and bloodlines. By 1687, groups of Native Black Americans escaped southward to St. Augustine, Florida, where Spain offered them sanctuary. There, they built the earliest maroon settlements, free towns defended by mixed Indigenous and some African descendant warriors as well. These settlements, protected by Spanish law and guarded by their own muskets, became the spiritual and physical foundation of what we now call the Seminole Nation, freedom born from unity and endurance. Now, when we get to the early 1700s, the dawn of the 18th century brought war and upheaval. You've got the Tuscarora War of 1711 to 1713. Tuscarora War, look it up. Native Black Americans allied with Tuscarora fighters to defend their homelands in the Carolinas. When the English prevailed, they enslaved and exported thousands of indigenous people to the Caribbean, a preview of what would soon sweep across the entire Southeast. That same decade, resistance flared in the heart of the North. In 1712, Native Black Americans in New York City launched a bold nighttime rebellion. They set fires near the docks and attacked colonists in the streets. Dozens were captured and executed, some tortured, others burned alive. In response, the colony enacted draconian new laws restricting movement, gatherings, and even drumming. But despite the terror, the will to resist spread. And then we get to the Yamasee War. But guys, before we get to the Yamasee War, I just want to give you guys a quick introduction into some of the work that I do through my website, NativeBlackAncestry.com. You see, as a genealogist and card-carrying member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, it's really my life's work to teach you guys how to trace your heritage and get tribal citizenship if that's something you're interested in. So definitely make sure to check out NativeBlackAncestry.com. And here's a quick word from some of my recent clients.
Hi, my name is Frances Tuck, and I contacted Mike from Mike TV on YouTube because I wanted to find out about my family's Native American history that I believed existed. Through the research that I was able to do through Mike TV, I was able to find out that our name is indeed on the registry. I had a consultation with Mike today, and because of his advice and the research that he has done, I am now confident that I'm able to find my family's roots in the Native American History database. Thank you, Mike.
All right, how y'all doing? My name's Major Wright. I just got done with my consultation with Mike. If you trying to trace your ancestry, Mike is a good first step to go through. He's going to break it down to you, all 3 steps to get you what you need. And if you want somebody to maybe do the research for you, you pay that price and Mike can help you too. But yes, he will fill you up with knowledge that you never knew and give you all the things like those unanswered questions in your head throughout time. Talk to Mike, man. He's a great dude. I believe in Mike.
What are you waiting for, guys? Real people, real results. Make sure to check out NativeBlackAncestry.com. But without further ado, the next thing that we're going to get into is the Yamasee War of 1715. And guys, I spent a long time on this timeline. I spent a long time connecting the dots so that you guys can just look up these wars, look up these rebellions, look up these plots, look up these conspiracies, and learn that we freed ourselves. It wasn't Abraham Lincoln. It wasn't some myth of a benevolent union, benevolent Northerners. No, 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 no. We freed ourselves. We've been resisting for centuries. The Yamasee War in 1715, one of the largest indigenous confederations ever assembled. The Yamasee Confederation was made up of Yamasee, Creek, Appalachee, and other Black indigenous warriors, and they all united and nearly annihilated the Carolina colony. For 2 years, the South burned. Afterwards, colonial governments sought revenge, not just in battle, but on paper, systematically reclassifying Native Black Americans as Negro, mulatto, or colored. It was the beginning of what we now know as paper genocide, the bureaucratic erasure of an entire people's identity. Genocide with a pen, if you will. By 1739, that spirit erupted into what is now known as the Stono Rebellion of South Carolina, the largest mainland uprising before the American Revolution. 20 Native Black American men, trained and battle-tested, seized weapons, beat drums of war, and marched south towards freedom in Spanish Florida. As they advanced, they liberated others, torched plantations, and struck fear into the colony's heart. When they were finally cornered, colonial militias executed them with sadistic cruelty, decapitating the fallen and placing their heads on stakes along the road in Charleston. Yeah, you heard that right. When we talk about things like a purge, when you see them fetishize things like a purge in Hollywood medias, I mean, our ancestors lived through multiple purge-like events. Decapitated, put our heads on stakes along the road in Charleston. This brutality was meant as a warning, but it became a rallying cry. Stono wasn't an isolated revolt. It was the continuation of Yamasee resistance, carried on by their descendants. And 2 years later, 1741, fear gripped the North once more. You see, a series of fires broke out in New York City, and authorities blamed the vast Native Black American conspiracy that alleged aim to burn the city to the ground. What followed was one of the darkest moments in colonial justice. There were mass arrests, secret trials, forced confessions, and executions. Dozens were hanged. 13 were burned alive, and more than 70 were banished. And this was not justice. It was racial theater, a northern echo of the terror that already ruled the South. Now, when we get into the Revolutionary era, I mean, liberty for who, right? While the colonies shouted for liberty from Britain, Native Black Americans were still fighting for freedom on their own ancestral soil. You've got the Cherokee American Wars in 1776. 1776 to 1794, this reflected the last organized indigenous stand against American expansion east of the Mississippi. Even as white revolutionaries claimed to fight tyranny, they marched west to seize indigenous land and enslave indigenous people. By 1800, the revolutionary spirit had transformed into something new, organized, militant, and spiritual. And this is where we get to Gabriel Prosser, a skilled Black indigenous blacksmith from Virginia. He plotted to seize Richmond, hold the governor hostage, and negotiate freedom for his people. He gathered hundreds of conspirators, men and women enslaved and free, bound together by shared ancestry and conviction. A violent storm delayed their march. Betrayal sealed their fate. Gabriel and 26 followers were hanged, but their vision, a sovereign homeland for Native Black Americans, survived him. Now, when you get to the early 1800s, the century's first decades were drenched in rebellion. In 1811, you've got the German Coast Uprising. The German Coast Uprising in Louisiana saw hundreds of Native Black Americans march towards New Orleans, waving banners and chanting freedom songs that echoed Maroon ceremonies. And their goal was not escape, it was revolution. Though it was crushed, their defiance shook the Gulf South. And in 1813, the struggle erupted again, this time among the Creek Red Sticks. Now we're talking about my tribe. We actually had a civil war called the Red Stick War. Part of my tribe got intermarried with Scottish Highlanders that came over here to weasel their way into the elite of our tribe, and they want to get down with European expansionism and assimilate. And then you had the other Creek faction, that just didn't want to go along to get along. You know, they wanted to maintain our indigenous way of life. So we had something called the Red Stick War. 1813, this literally split families and nations. The Red Sticks were inspired by the pan-indigenous movement of Tecumseh, and it struck a decisive blow at Fort Mims in modern-day Alabama. And when we speak about the massacre of Fort Mims, 1813, Fort Mims massacre of 1813, I don't know if you guys have ever looked into this, but Fort Mims was where hundreds of settlers, militia, and mixed race Creeks who had sided with the Americans, that's where they were living, in Fort Mims. And on August 30th, 1813, over 700 Red Stick warriors from my tribe surrounded and stormed the fort. When the gates were breached, chaos followed. Gunfire, smoke, and flames filled the compound. By the end of the assault, more than 250 settlers and soldiers lay dead, their bodies burned or mutilated. To this day, historians call it the greatest loss of colonial life on U.S. soil until September 11th, 2001. Yeah, you heard that right. Members of my tribe gave the European settlers such a devastating blow, historians said it was the worst terror attack until 9/11. Damn. Shout out to the Red Sticks. For the young United States, it was a shockwave, a terror so profound that newspapers across the country screamed of savagery and blood. But for the Red Sticks, it was a message. The colonizers' advance would not go unchallenged. Now, this event turned the Creek War into a war of extermination. Andrew Jackson responded with scorched earth tactics, leading to the slaughter of thousands of Creek people and the seizure of over 20 million acres of land. Fort Mims became both a symbol of retribution and resistance, a defining moment in the long war between Native Black America and U.S. expansion. And 2 years later, in 1816, that same war spirit rose again in Spanish Florida at Fort Negro. Fort Negro was a stronghold built and defended by free Black Indigenous Maroons. When U.S. forces bombarded the fort, a single cannonball struck the powder magazine, causing an explosion that killed more than 250 men, women, and children instantly. Look it up, guys. I'm not doing it justice. Just speaking about it for a minute or two and then moving on. I mean, take the time, go on, look up Fort Negro. This was a Black Indigenous fort. We were living freely. We were resisting. We were allied with the Spanish. And them boys came over shooting cannons at us. One of the cannonballs hit the powder magazine, and now, boom, the whole fort just blows up. Men, women, children, everybody dead. It was one of the deadliest acts of government violence before the Civil War, yet it rarely appears in textbooks. Come on, let me get some fists or feathers in the chat if you're just hearing about it right now for the first time. Right now for the first time? Why is that? Why is that? I mean, can we really expect our oppressor to be our educator?
There is no reason in the world for us to believe that European Americans will ever educate our children correctly. Ain't no reason in the world. I mean, why would you believe that? What would give you the idea that you could ever convince these people to educate your children right? I don't care how much you protest, how much you demand, they will never do it. What they will end up doing is getting some white folks to teach them Afrocentric orientations. Because anybody in their right minds would know that anyone who has systematically blocked you from knowing for 3 centuries will not change overnight. over a year, over a decade, over a score of years, or even over a century. The only way we'll ever be able to really educate our children is to do it ourselves. That's the only way. That's the only way. Now, it can work different. Now, that doesn't mean all of us need to pull out of the public schools. The public schools belong to us too. And there are skills and resources there we can use. But for the real learning, for the learning that will empower them, we have got to depend on us to do that.
Come on, y'all. Come on. That's exactly why. If you go to nativeblack.ancestry.com, you can order my new course, Hidden Heritage. This was 2 years in the making, y'all. It took me 2 years to put this course together because at the end of the day, I'm a father. I got a 6-year-old. A lot of my viewers are parents, grandparents even. And they voice their opinions, not really their opinions, they voice their fears about the next generation being brought up yet again to believe that we come from some belly of a slave boat that came here from West Africa, right? So this course that I made, it's really for ages 12 and up, but it's really great for the youth. It's really great way to supplement their education. I mean, not everybody is going to pull their kid out of public school and start homeschooling and stuff. I mean, we got to work, we got lives and stuff, right? But we can at least supplement their education. You can send them to public school to learn that math and that science and that literature, but when it comes to that history, when it comes to that indigenous history, go to nativeblack.ancestry.com so you can check out that new course. It's actually half off. It officially launches in a few weeks, so if you become a founding student of mine, you get it for half off. Make sure to check it out. But guys, let's pick up where we left off. We were talking about Fort Negro and how they bombed it with cannons, killed 250 men, women, and children instantly. And the U.S. government called it pacification. In actuality, it was annihilation, the destruction of a free indigenous republic. And this leads us directly to the First Seminole War, 1817, when Andrew Jackson invaded Florida to crush the alliance of Black indigenous Seminoles and Maroons. For the government, it was a campaign of conquest. For the Seminoles, it was the continuation of a centuries-old struggle for freedom. And when we get to, the 1820s, the 1840s, hey, we're going to talk about some prophets and some plots. By 1822, the battlefront shifted from swamps to cities. Denmark Vesey, a free Black indigenous carpenter in Charleston, organized thousands to seize the city, liberate the enslaved, and sail to Haiti. His strategy blended scripture, secrecy, and seafaring knowledge passed down through Maroon networks. Unfortunately, he was betrayed. The crackdown was ruthless. Vesey and 34 others were hanged, their heads displayed to break the will of the community. But Charleston's soil absorbed their blood, and their names became scripture in the oral history of resistance. And a decade later comes Nat Turner's Rebellion of 1831 in Virginia. Turner, a preacher of Black indigenous descent, don't believe me, look it up. He believed that he was chosen by divine revelation to end bondage. His uprising swept across Southampton County, leaving planters in terror. The same decade in the swamps of Florida, we've got the Second Seminole War, 1835. And this is another front in the same struggle. Both Turner's revolt and the Seminole resistance, it shared a prophetic core. Indigenous folks were having visions, ancestral memory, and a conviction that liberation was holy. And in 1841, the struggle reached the sea once again. A group of Black indigenous captives aboard the Creole mutinied. They seized control and they sailed to the Bahamas, where they won freedom under British law. It was the most successful maritime revolt in U.S. history, a direct echo of the Maroon tradition, and most of you have probably never heard of it, right? The Creole. The Creole was the name of a ship. These Black indigenous captives took over the ship, mutinied, and sailed to the Bahamas, got freedom and protection under British law. Come on. Let's talk about it. Now, you have to remember that we're going to get to the Civil War, but these are so many conflicts, so many slave rebellions, Indian wars, and you got to understand that they compartmentalize history and make you think that there's a difference between a slave rebellion and an Indian war. Here's the difference. If I'm an Indian and I'm not enslaved, I'm running around freely and I'm banging against the Europeans, well, they call that an Indian war. But if I'm captured, if I'm enslaved in place, taken as a prisoner of war, and I resist, well, now it's a slave rebellion. But guys, I'm hoping that I'm really putting this in perspective for you, because you got to know that the Civil War, nah. Abraham Lincoln, nah. We were freeing ourselves. We eventually freed ourselves. 1855, we get to the third Seminole War. Yes, 3 different Black Indigenous armed resistance movements. The third Seminole War marked the U.S. government's final campaign to eliminate the last free Indigenous Seminoles from Florida's Everglades. They fought in the mangroves, living ghosts of a people who had never surrendered. From Yamasee to Fort Mims, from Fort Negro to the Everglades, they embodied an unbroken lineage of resistance, one that had lasted over 150 years. And when we finally get to the Civil War, oh man, when we finally get to the Civil War, let me properly put this in perspective for you guys. They'll never teach it to you this way. The Civil War was the greatest slave rebellion. When war finally erupted in 1861, the world called it the American Civil War. But in truth, this is the largest Native Black American rebellion in recorded history, the culmination of every revolt that had come before. Nearly 200,000 Black Indigenous men enlisted in the Union Army and the Navy. Plantations burned again, enslavers fled, and the South convulsed in the same fear that had haunted it since the Stono Rebellion. What textbooks call emancipation was, in fact, a 200-year-long Indigenous uprising finally reaching its breaking point. From 1680 to 1865, the rebellions never stopped. Remember, the Civil War starts in 1861. Lincoln is on record saying, hey, if I can win the war and not free a single slave, I would do it. But guess what? Before he even issued an Emancipation Proclamation, slaves were defecting and fleeing to the North, the Underground Railroad. We all know about that, right? Not only that, there were slaves in the South sabotaging plantations. I forget the name of him. You guys can look it up. There was one Black Indigenous man. He was enslaved. Again, a lot of our ancestors who were enslaved, not all of our ancestors even were slaves, but those that were enslaved, they were prisoners of war. They were enslaved in place. They came from here, not from West Africa, but they weren't just like some cotton pickers. Like, they were engineers. They were mathematicians. They were architects. They were blacksmiths. They were tradesmen. So I don't have the exact name. I can probably find it with a Google search, but there was this one slave in the South that they had they had him as a captain of a boat. And one day him and his folks, they stole the boat. They ran off with the boat, took it to, hold on, I got to find the name, y'all. I got to find the name. Slave stole Confederate ship. He stole the Confederate ship, sailed it to the Union. The ship had like secret plans in it, a bunch of guns and ammunition and stuff. I mean, y'all don't understand. We won that Civil War. North wouldn't have won it without us. Let's talk about it. The person that I'm speaking about, his name is Robert Smalls. Look him up. Robert Smalls. He stole the Confederate ship called the CSS Planter in Charleston, South Carolina on May 13th, 1862. Come on. Civil War don't end. Slavery don't end till 1865. But in 62, we got Black Indigenous folks stealing the boat and running. Come on. The CSS Planter, he sailed the vessel out of the heavily fortified harbor and surrendered it to the Union blockade fleet, securing freedom for himself, his crew, and their families. Smalls was an experienced sailor and the Planter's wheelman. He devised the plan for freedom with his enslaved crewmates. Guys, there's dozens of stories like this. There's dozens. Our ancestors was double agents and shit. So some of them was on the plantation giving information to the Union soldiers. I mean, we self-emancipated. Let's talk about it. And you got to understand that every so-called slave revolt, every Indian war, every Maroon uprising, they all were chapters of the same epic story, the story of Native Black Americans, the Black indigenous people of this land fighting for sovereignty, for family, for freedom. When historians separate those wars, they distort the truth. This is one continuous conflict, an indigenous war for liberation disguised by colonial terminology. From the blood at Stono and the flames at Fort Mims to the swamps of Florida and the battlefields of the Civil War, this is not many stories, but one. This is the hidden war before the Civil War, a war fought not just with muskets, but with memory, a war that began the day that the first chain was fastened and ended only when Native Black America rose to break it. But you know what I want to do, guys? I want to open up the panel. I'm going to go ahead and drop the StreamYard link. If anybody wants to call in, now is the time to do so. While we wait to see if we have any live callers, I do have some content that I want to share with you. And this is going to be discussing the Seminole War, one of many. Now you know, when you hear about the Seminole War, when you hear about the Yamasee War, one of many wars. When you get with me and do your genealogy and you learn that your great-great-great-grandfather fought in the U.S. colored troops and stuff, know that he comes from this indigenous rebellious spirit. Hundreds of years we've been fighting, resisting, fighting and resisting, fighting and resisting, fighting and resisting, and we're still occupied to this day, aren't we? And still we fight, and still we resist.
1776. 13 American colonies rebel against British rule, but Florida remains loyal to England. The river dividing Georgia and Florida becomes an international border. Hundreds of blacks enslaved on American plantations escape south, finding refuge and allies among the Seminole Indians in northern Florida. Enraged slave owners enlist the United States government to destroy the Black and Seminole alliance. But in 50 years of fighting, the bond between Black and Seminole is not broken.
You really have to watch the mainstream academic trickery, y'all. The mainstream academic trickery. They'll talk about it as if it's Blacks and Seminoles, as if they're different people, right? Matter of fact, first they said Black Indians don't exist. They said we're Wabos. They said we're Pretendians. Then we came out with the archaeological evidence, the anthropological evidence. So many receipts, so many receipts. So then they changed their tune. They said, okay, Black Indians exist, but you know what? You guys like really came from Africa a bajillion years ago, once upon a time, right? So you got to watch out when you hear a lot of mainstream academics talking about, yeah, Black Indians, Black Indians, Black Indians, because more often than not, they still try to tie this to some, oh, you're really an African that like married a native and really you're mixed. No, there were Black indigenous people here since day one, from time immemorial. Let's talk about it. Come on. And you know, it's interesting because the title, the thumbnail, I mean, it says U.S. government admits American Negroes descend from American Indian tribes, right? Some of you guys might think that this is like clickbait. This is just me trying to get some views over here. Nah. Y'all call me the king of receipts, and I live up to the name. I got a book from Chief Sekou of the Yamasee Nation. Matter of fact, where's that book? Where is that book at? I got so many documents everywhere. I got so many books. I think I got it. Here we go. Yamasee Indians, Culture, Heritage, and Practices by Chief Sekou. You can get this book at YamaseeNation.com. YamaseeNation.com. But let's do a little bit of reading. You know, reading is oh so fundamental at the end of the day, ain't it?
Reading rainbow, reading rainbow,
All right. So right here on page 3, we're reading from page 3. It says, we Yamasee Native Americans were described as woolly-haired, dark Negro Indians whose hair was different, as described in congressional documents held in congressional archives even today. We were considered darker than the Creeks. Now, to say our hair was different means obviously we didn't look like the typical Hollywood depicted Indians that our grandmothers and grandfathers grew up watching on TV as young children. The Hollywood Indians that were portrayed in black and white films were played by white actors. Those images were deliberately shown for the sole purpose of having our great aunts and uncles and grandmothers mentally discard any identification with Indian ancestry via self-identity. Our aunts, uncles, and grandmothers were to conclude that since they did not resemble what a TV Indian looked like, they must have been either half-blood or weren't Indian at all, even though they might have known they had a full-blooded mother or grandmother identified as an Indian. Let's talk about it, guys. Matter of fact, on the front cover of this book, on the front cover is one of those congressional quotes. And this, again, goes back to how they try to Africanize Black Indigenous Americans. This is one of the quotes from Congress. This is an excerpt from Congressional Serial Set by United States Government Printing Office, 57th Congress, First Session, House of Representatives, document number 179, Report of the Industrial Commission on Agriculture and Agricultural Labor, Washington Government Printing Office, year 1901, page 824. That's how you cite a source. You guys can pause this, rewind it, look up this document, look it up. This is from Congress. Quote, that the Yamasee Indians were Negroes, what were known afterwards as the fiercest of the Indian tribes of the South. The well-known Yamasee Indians were Africans. Whoa, not U.S. Congress trying to Africanize Black Indigenous people, not there's a dark-skinned Black Negroid warrior tribe, and you can't hide them because they're taking out all your settlers. They're banging against you guys. You can't hide them. So they say, okay, well, they're Africans. What? Huh? So you tell me U.S. Congress is pulling such an okie doke, they want us to believe that Africans migrated here before them. And the reason why you've never heard that promoted in school or anything was because that's something they kind of specifically promoted here in this congressional document, because they were trying to explain away this Black Indigenous tribe. Okay, so these Black Indians are here. They had to have sailed here from Africa before Columbus. And don't take my word for it. Actually, look it up. Look it up. They say the smartest tool nowadays is ChatGPT, right? And ChatGPT is just that. It's a tool. It's not a source. You got to use it the right way. And let's check out ChatGPT for just a moment if we can. Let's just check them out for just a moment, because I'm wondering if they can actually give me like the full text of the congressional quote, or if we can get a little more in depth on this theory of the Yamasee being Africans, and whether or not any mainstream academics, substantiated that claim ever, or if it was just something that Congress mentioned once upon a time and never really brought up again. But let's see, guys. Let's see what we have here. Let's come over here to ChatGPT for just a moment. Just a moment. All right, let's see. Can you pull up a congressional quote about the Yamasee Indigenous tribe? Did mainstream academics or did the United States government itself allege that they came from Africa at some point? All right, it's searching the congressional quotes of the Yamasee tribe. I found one clear congressional reference and also traces of the idea that the Yamasee emigrated from Africa in some U.S. government documents. Come on, the U.S. government wants you to believe that the Black Indians came from Africa. First, they hid the history of Black Indians. They reclassified them to Negro, mulatto, free person of color, freedmen. But the Black Indians that are wild and rebellious and going to war with you, well, Hey, they came from Africa. Came from Africa. A very striking reference appears in H.R. 4637, which is a modern piece of legislation. The bill states, quote, each town, hold on, I'm gonna go straight to the course. The source is congress.gov. I'm on congress.gov now. Here's the bill, guys. We're gonna read the bill, HR 4637. That's how deep we got to get with the receipts. ChatGPT is just a tool. It's not the end all be all, ladies and gentlemen. Let's see where this quote go. Creek Nation of Oklahoma, Muskogee Creeks. That's my tribe right there. Creek Nation. Now we're looking for Yamasee. What I'm going to do is, I think it's Control F. There we go. See if we can find Yamasee. Here we go. Congress finds the following. This is in their findings. They say historically, the Muskogee Creek Nation were comprised of a confederacy of separate towns, tribes, and people. Each town was a complete governmental unit in and of itself. And guys, this is very, very true. I actually descend from the Chief Justice of the Muskogee Creek Nation. My grandfather's name was Thomas Jefferson Adams Harjo. This is him right here. He was a town king. Why was he a town king? What is a town king? Well, each one of our indigenous towns functioned as its own governmental entity. So that's why he was known as a town king. And yes, my ancestor, although he's listed on the Dawes Roll as a full-blooded Indian, mainstream academics, more specifically some asshole professor from the University of Georgia, try to reclassify him in books as an African. Even though I can pull him up on the Dawes Roll right now. I can pull him on the Dawes Roll right now. Roll number 2145. If anybody wants to look him up, 2145. Thomas J. Adams, the J is for Jefferson. Here we go. 57 years old is when he's placed on the roll. His blood quantum is full. He's a Creek by blood, a full-blooded Indian. Chief Justice of the Creek Nation, a town king, and mainstream academics in the 21st century try to reclassify my grandfather as an African. So now you see why I go so hard in the paint. This is personal. Historically, the Muskogee Creek Nation were comprised of a confederacy of separate towns, tribes, and peoples. Each town was a complete governmental unit in and of itself. Among these people were the Yamasee or the Jamasee, who were reported to have immigrated from Africa prior to the European discovery of America. Now, guys, what is going on here? Congress is saying they did some research and they found that the Yamasee come from Africa, but nowhere in public school do they teach you about a Black, indigenous, rebellious tribe that migrated here from Africa before the European discovery of America. Nor do they tell you how the Yamasee came over, where the Yamasee ships went, what part of Africa they came to, the similarities between the Yamasee culture and the African culture. I mean, no, but they just pull some shit out their ass real quick when it's time to explain away a Black indigenous tribe that's kicking their ass. Okay. Hey, if this is true, where's the sources? As colonists and eventually non-indigenous Americans began to inhabit this area, these new residents sought to civilize the Creek Indian. In the ensuing decades, the United States continuously and repeatedly attempted to impose, often by force, its customs, economy, religion, and political structure on indigenous groups such as the Creek Nation. That's my tribe we're talking about right there. Troubling history. Troubling history. Look it up, guys. Look it up. I'm sure you guys have heard, Black folk out there, I'm sure when it comes to getting in touch with your indigenous roots, you've heard people say, what do you mean your ancestor was an Indian? What? There was like a slave of some Indians? But notice how they never tell you like what tribe allegedly had all these Black folks as slaves. And then even if they name a tribe, like, are you saying every single tribal member had a Black slave, or like certain tribal members had slaves? Or they don't know. They haven't done the research. I have. I live this. These Indians that had slaves are the same Indians that signed the treaties that resulted in us walking the Trail of Tears and losing millions of our millions of acres of our ancestral homeland. The same Indians that had slaves are the same Indians that signed the treaties, and every single one of them was a half-breed with a Scottish father and an Indian mother. Look it up. Look up the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, the Creek, the Seminole. Look up what treaty they signed, the date, and the name of the treaty that resulted in the tribe walking the Trail of Tears. Look up the Indian that signed the treaty. I bet you're going to see a last name like McIntosh. Oh. And I didn't pull that name out of a hat. The half-breed Scottish sellout of our tribe, the Creek Nation, was called William McIntosh. His father was a Scottish nobleman. His cousin was the governor of Georgia. And this half-breed sellout agent provocateur, oh, sorry, you don't see the image. This half-breed sellout agent provocateur was used to sign treaties and give away millions of acres of my tribe's land and force us to Oklahoma. And guess what we did when we found out he signed that treaty without our permission? Creek warriors went to his house, shot him like 80 times, and burnt his plantation. Yes, he had a plantation. Why did he have a plantation? Because he had slaves. This is one of those Indians that have slaves. Looks real white to be an Indian, huh? Oh, because his daddy's a Scottish man. So you see how they don't really want to do the scholarship. They don't really want to do the research, but they want to tell you bullshit to try to scare you away from researching your indigenous heritage. Oh, no, don't look into great granny who said that y'all Indian. No, because Indians have black folks as slaves. No, a very small minority, elitist, half-breed Scottish class of indigenous people had slaves. These are the same ones that sided with the Confederacy. These are the same ones on the reservation present day, trying to keep you from getting tribal citizenship, right? These are the same ones that got control of my tribe in 1979 and changed the tribal constitution to say that it's no longer good enough for you to have an ancestor listed on the Dawes Roll as part of the tribe for you to get Muskogee Creek citizenship. No, from 1979 onward, these $5 Indians changed the Constitution in the middle of the night. They changed it to say from 1979 onward, you have to have an ancestor listed on the Dawes Roll as part of the tribe, and they have to have a blood quantum recorded. And they did that on purpose because they knew damn well hundreds of thousands of Black indigenous people had ancestors who were racially reclassified as a freedman. And when they reclassify you as a freedman, they also don't write down your blood quantum. So in 1979, hundreds of thousands of Black folks are kicked out of my tribe, and they don't get their citizenship rights restored until July 23rd, 2025. Kicked out in 1979, don't get their citizenship rights back until July 23rd, 2025. You guys may have seen it in the news, the Creek Freedmen court victory, right? For 40 years, they've been fighting through Congress and senators and legislation, and they finally won. But again, the government's admitting these Black indigenous people exist, so we got to Africanize them. If you look at the news and CNN and Fox News, when they talk about the Creek Freedmen, they're going to say that they're Africans who were enslaved by the Creek Nation. Okay, but it was only a few elite half-breed Creek Indians that had slaves, and there's so many Black indigenous people you reclassified as a freedman. So what's really going on here? What's really going on? Let's talk about it. But what I want to do is, once again, urge you guys to check out my website, nativeblackancestry.com. I've built it out with tons of historical references. If you need genealogy assistance, you can book a one-on-one consultation with me where I'll teach you the 3-step process me and my family use to trace our heritage and get tribal citizenship with the Muskogee Creek Nation. And here's a quick word from one of my recent clients.
Hi, my name is Vishelle, and I came across Mike on YouTube showing some historical information about how, we're not all from Africa. And of course, it got my attention as I've been doing my genealogy research for a little while, but I hit a brick road and I needed more help. So the consultation that I had with Mike, it was great, very informative. It showed me a lot of history that I was unaware of, and it's made me more aware of what I don't know. So with finding him, I'm pretty sure that it's going to open up a new door, information about who I really am, who my lineage is, and I'm excited to get started. I'm so happy to have found him, and I recommend him to anyone who may have hit a brick road, who is interested in, going a little bit further than they may have been able to get, or just to find out the truth about your ancestry. Contact him.
Let's talk about it, y'all. Real people, real results. And also, again, I just built out that hidden heritage course. If you go to nativeblack.ancestry.com and get the course before it officially launches, you get 50% off. So check that out. If you're not familiar with my content, you're watching me for the first time and you're like, damn, who is this guy? He's teaching me a whole bunch. I ain't never heard about none of. Wait a minute. Then imagine what you can learn from a formal, structured course that I spent over 2 years putting together. But guys, we do have a caller backstage, OTK. OTK, go ahead and unmute yourself. Let the people know where you're calling in from and what's on your mind. OTK going once. OTK going twice. All right, OTK couldn't find the unmute button. It's all good, y'all. It's all good. All right, let's finish out some more of this video that we were watching about the Seminole. And then we're going to transition into the next live stream. Again, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. I thank you all for tuning in this evening. And let's keep the information going.
Charlie Wilson is dedicated to passing on the history of her Seminole ancestors.
So many blacks were in slavery, and we would say died for being black, and we survived.
The heritage of these black Seminoles is unique. Their existence as a people proves that whites failed to destroy the alliance they most feared.
They knew if there was ever a joint effort that they wouldn't be able to control. They couldn't control either race, the black or the Indians.
The Indians were skilled, but then you had your blacks, some of them were domesticated by the whites. They knew their ways, they knew their weaknesses. So together, what do you get? A formidable foe, because they're stronger together.
American slave owners feared the united strength of the Africans they had enslaved and the Indians whose land they had stolen. This combined African and Indian force soon became Florida's best defense against American invaders. A 1783 treaty ended the American Revolution. Control of Florida returned to Spain, the territory's original colonial ruler. As the Spanish moved into St. Augustine, the Americans demanded the return of escaped slaves. But the Spanish had other plans.
Anytime, day or night, step out and see what's taking place.
Historian Jane Landers discovered records documenting that the Spanish encouraged a military alliance between blacks and Indians.
Sometimes you will see on the list detachments of the Free Black militias specifically posted out at Indian villages. The Black and Indian militias were the military force on the frontier. So the Spanish would be negotiating at diplomatic levels with the United States, but they would send out the Indians and the blacks to do the fighting.
Come on, y'all, peep the hijack, peep the psyops, the blacks and the Indians and the blacks. I mean, guys, this is a tale as old as time. Look it up. Whenever you got a prominent Black Indian, a prominent, free person of color even, they always, if they have to admit that they're indigenous, they always throw some African American and indigenous. Mildred Jeter, Loving versus Virginia, they try to tell us that that was a African American and indigenous woman. No, she's full-blooded Virginia Indian. Crispus Attucks, first martyr of the Boston Massacre, they try to tell us he's African American and Indian. No, he was just a Nantucket Indian. No.
And the free blacks in St. Augustine were very connected many times to the blacks that were living in the Seminole villages. What we now call the Seminoles were living in their own villages, for instance, very large settlements near what is now Gainesville, Florida, in the Alachua Savannah area.
A close relationship developed between Seminoles and blacks on this prairie. Some white observers mistakenly assumed the blacks were slaves to the Seminoles.
Wait a minute. What do you mean some white observers mistakenly assumed the blacks were slaves of the... Oh. So when you hear people modern day talking about, oh, black Indians, they were just slaves of the Indians. That's where they get some of that dumb shit from. So guys, it goes like this. I'm walking back in the day with a group of people, and some of the people walking with me are darker skinned than me. So the white dude, the white settler, right? The colonizer, he's maybe like half a mile away and he sees us and stuff and he says, damn, well, that one dude is lighter skinned than the darker skinned ones. So the dark skinned ones must be the slaves of the lighter one. Yeah. What? Some white observers mistakenly assume the blacks are slaves of the Seminoles. Okay. That's a hell of an assumption to make, ain't it?
A close relationship developed between Seminoles and blacks on this prairie. Some white observers mistakenly assumed the blacks were slaves to the Seminoles.
It really was not a slave-master relationship. It was more a free existence. They intermarried. The children were accepted in the tribes quite easily, and they had a common interest in wanting to hold that land where they were living freely. They had acquired big herds of cattle themselves. They had nice fields and homes.
But Georgian slave owners raged against the Black and Seminole alliance. They demanded that the U.S. government capture the former slaves and their children, even if it meant invading Spanish Florida, which they did in 1812.
Blacks and Indians fought so fiercely and with such determination that they routed the Georgians who were invading Florida. They even fought and defeated a U.S. Marine contingent that was assisting those Georgians.
Come on, our ancestors was putting in work, y'all, putting in work. But don't go anywhere. As soon as this broadcast ends, there's going to be a countdown on the screen, and it's going to automatically push you into the next live stream. This is a marathon. It's not a sprint. I'll see you guys in just a moment.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British, man. Quite frankly, you was kings, Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners, raised up the children to worship their images, set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them. And this shit get way deeper than your pigment.